Morning, friends, and welcome to today's Light and Darkness reading. Doing it again a little earlier this morning because of some things I've got going on this afternoon. But I hope you guys are enjoying the story as much as I am. Chapter 27, A History Lesson. The chasm between the armies was being filled slowly but surely by the giants of Abassaron. The next attack was not far off. Lord Bonson had had a long day of sword instruction and then cavalry training. His body was fatigued and his mind was active when, late in the evening, he rapped on the door of Hellel's tent. "Lord Bonson," Hellel said in a friendly but somewhat surprised greeting as he opened the door. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Bonson said. "Not at all. Please come in. I miss our talks. May I offer you a glass of wine?" "Yes, thank you." Hellel poured the dark red wine into a tall wineglass as Bonson seated himself at the small round table in the tent. Hellel also poured a glass for himself, then he raised his glass and said, "To the pride of the Twin Kingdoms." "To the man who gave him the most important advice in his life," Bonson said, raising his glass in turn. They both took a healthy drink of the wine, then Hellel said, "Now, what can I do for you?" "Do you remember the day in the Karagan Hills when you told us about the history of the Lacenae and the Dachmanim?" "I remember it well." "You indicated then that in learning the history of Lacenea with Hope's father, you also learned much of the history of Hurin." "Yes, I remember." "To me, what you said sounded like Lacenea and Hurin share a common origin." "That's very perceptive, Lord Bonson." "That is something I was never taught growing up in a Hurin noble family, even though my home was in Lacenea." "No, I wouldn't think so," Hellel replied. "Seeing themselves as the most important and powerful kingdom on Earth, Hurin certainly would not want to continue to propagate the fact that they came from Lacenean origins. That information has been lost in Hurin for hundreds of season changes." "Would you tell me about it?" Bonson asked. "Unless you need to sleep now, in which case I can come back another time." "No, I would be up for several more hours thinking anyway," Hellel said. "If you have the time, then I would be happy to share. It is not often these days that I get to teach a history lesson." "Please go on," Bonson said. Hellel took another drink of wine and then began. "You know that Hurin is named after her first emperor. What you most likely don't know is that he was descended from Daivon the Great." At this, Bonson's eyebrows raised. This was a surprising revelation, but he did not doubt its truth coming from Lord Hellel. Hellel continued, "After Al-Saladineh I defeated Dachman and chased them far into the west, he and his army returned to Lacenea. But they realized that the defeat of Dachman left many power vacuums in the lands west of the Camden Mountains. As the tribes in the Lacenean Valley were consolidated into a kingdom with Daivon at its head, these western lands began to form into tribes and live in a way very much like the Lacenean tribes had done previously. It was a rough existence, with many chiefs of small villages who were always warring with one another. After about 100 season changes, a group of nobles from Lacenea decided that the teachings of the Lacenae should be shared beyond the valley. At that time, Daivon's great-grandson, Hananel, was on the throne in Lacenea, and his younger brother, Hamar, decided to lead a group of settlers through the pass into the western lands. They would not trouble any of the tribes, but they did make sure there were enough Lacinian warriors to keep them safe from attacks. Their plan was simply to form a settlement and travel to nearby tribes, sharing the teachings of the Lacinae as expressed in the works of Divan the Great. For the most part, this worked well. The people were very taken with Divan's teachings of justice, and many of the chiefs were as well. There were some chiefs that had no interest, however. They felt like Divan's teaching that even rulers are subject to the law undermined their absolute rule. However, none of them could challenge Hamar's finely trained fighting force, so they simply ignored him. However, if any of these other tribes had a quarrel with those who had entered a league with Hamar, then he would protect them. As you would imagine, this started to make him enemies. As Lord Hamar led his colony, more and more tribes joined him, as well as defectors from hostile tribes who he never sent back. Hamar felt that he had the right to live among Hamar felt that they had the right to live among his people if they chose to. Lord Hamar's authority was subject to his brother, the king of Lacinia, and technically his colony was considered an extension of Lacinia. Lord Hamar had only one child, a son who was growing into a mighty warrior as the western colony grew. His name was Hurin. You know him as the founder of the Hurin Empire. His name, of course, meant strong arm. And by the time he was a teenager, this was a name that certainly rang true. From the surviving sketches and paintings, he looked a lot like you, Lord Bonson. But I'm sure you have been told that before. After some years, the hostile chiefs became so fed up with Hamar that they formed a pact among themselves to rid the land of his colony. They made secret plans to attack, but first they planned to get rid of Lord Hamar, thinking that they could win without his leadership. They had recruited many tribes from near and far, telling them that Hamar's influence would soon undermine their rule if he was not dealt with. Hamar was a man of little fear, so they found an opportunity to assassinate him when he was out riding alone one day. With his father dead, the rule of the western colony came to young Lord Hurin, who was 20 season changes old at the time. Lord Hurin was wise as well as mighty. He expected that an attack of some sort would follow soon after the murder of his father. He quickly organized his fighting men for the defense of the colony. When the tribal confederation attacked, the colony was outnumbered at least 5-1. But under Lord Hurin's leadership, the attackers were routed. Lord Hurin was well acquainted with the military writings of Al-Saladinay I. He knew well how to execute a successful battle, and the tribal force was sloppy and haphazard in their attack. After this, Lord Hurin's fame began to spread, and many more tribes placed themselves under his leadership, especially those left leaderless by his magnificent victory. In addition to being a great warrior, Lord Hurin was a very intelligent man. He had grown up being schooled in the writings of Divan the Great. He believed in them wholeheartedly, but after the murder of his father and the attack on the colony, he began to think that Lacinia was a well-protected land because the only way in from the west was to Camden Pass. However, the western lands were wild and his colony had no natural barrier. While he had been able to defeat the first confederation of hostile tribes, he worried that a larger force might someday muster, if not in his day, then in a day of his heirs. He also considered the fact that most tribes and even kingdoms were ruled by selfish men who would mistreat people for their own benefit, whereas Lacinia was ruled by leaders who believed their purpose was to serve the people. The result of these musings was this. Divan the Great had written against imperialism of any form. Lacinia would never use her might to conquer or subjugate people. Lord Hurin thought Divan was wrong. He thought Divan's writings should be adapted in light of the practical needs of living beyond the Camden Pass. He thought that, for the good of the Western colony and for the good of the people living under tyranny, Lacinia should bring the light to the wild Western tribes by conquering them and placing them under her benevolent leadership. As a great warrior who was already living beyond the pass, he saw himself as the man who should oversee this process. 10 season changes after his great victory, he wrote a letter to his uncle, King Hananel, communicating these thoughts. Hananel immediately sent back a letter telling him that Lacinia would never engage in imperialism of any kind. If we begin to alter the teachings of Divan to fit our perceived needs, he wrote, where does it stop? He told Lord Hurin that he was a valued leader and he wished him to continue ruling the colony, but that he must never think of conquering others in the name of the light. When Lord Hurin received the king's letter, he was angry. At first he accepted the king's decision, but his thoughts stayed with him. He truly believed Hananel was wrong. So after about 2 more season changes, he wrote him a letter saying that he respected his opinions, but that since Hananel would not give him the needed authority to protect his colony, which to him meant conquest, his colony would establish itself as an independent kingdom. There was no longer any need for Lacinian patronage. In other words, he told Hananel in the nicest terms possible that since he would not give him what he wanted, he would start his own kingdom. Hananel was very upset by this. As he considered what to do, he consulted his most trusted friend, who was also his military general, Alcala Dene IV. Alcala said that the only thing to do was remove Hurin from leadership by force if necessary. Hananel would not do that. He knew that Lord Hurin commanded the loyalty of his own warriors, and that if Alcala marched on them, Lacinia would certainly win, but that at the cost of great bloodshed on both sides. Then Alcala had another idea. He said, "Let me challenge him to a duel. We'll tell him that if he wins, he may succeed. That way the colony will remain Lacinian, and only one man will have to die." "What if he wins?" Hananel asked. "If he wins," Alcala replied, "change the name on my gravestone, because I will not be worthy to remembered under the name Dene." "That sounds like Alva," Bonson interjected. "Yes, it does," Hello said with a smile. "And what did Hananel say?" After carefully considering, he said no. He believed that it was wrong to spread his rule by force. It was also wrong to force the colony to stay under his rule by force. "That would have been quite a duel," Bonson said, a little disappointed. "Yes, it would have." "Do you think Alcala would have won?" Bonson asked. "Knowing what I know about Lord Hurin, I have always doubted it. He was much larger and was one of the greatest warriors in history. However, after meeting a real Dene and seeing what he can do, I have little doubt now that Alcala would have won." Bonson nodded in assent. "Instead of fighting," Hillel continued, "Hananel simply made plans to travel to the colony and discuss the matter with Lord Hurin. He would not bring an army, but only Alcala and 10 men, enough to protect him on the journey, but not enough to make any threat of force. They left immediately and sent a rider so that Lord Hurin would be prepared for them. A meeting was held outside the western colony. King Hananel, recognizing the historical importance of this meeting, wrote an account of it immediately afterward so that he could have a record of the discussion that was virtually verbatim. We do not need to go through all the details, Hananel explained the dangers of trying to adapt Daivon's principles to fit contemporary whims, while Lord Huron insisted that some principles needed to be adapted to fit changing practical needs. Hananel challenged him by asking where it stopped, and whether slavery or torture might become acceptable if some new need seemed to justify them. Lord Huron said that, of course, some principles never change. Hananel asked who should decide which principles are the ones that need to be changed, and Lord Huron said, the wise, those in the best position to decide. Hananel said, in this case meaning yourself. Without hesitation, Lord Huron said, yes. At this point, it was becoming very clear that talking was futile, and that Lord Huron would do as he wished and fight for the right if necessary. So Al-Salah asked his king if he might say a word. Confident that his general would not disobey his command confident that his general would not obey his command about not challenging Lord Huron, he gave him permission. Lord Huron, he began, if you do this, you break away and begin an empire. Sooner or later, your descendants are going to set their sights east. Someday, your heirs will attack Laconia. That will never happen, Lord Huron replied. Our kingdoms will forever remain friends and allies. So you say, Al-Salah continued, but once an empire is established, sooner or later it will view all independent kingdoms as a threat. Daivon said that, and he was right. If you do this, my heirs will always be ready to repel your attack. I will not sire fools, and only a fool would think he could take the Camden Pass while the Danais defend it. An emperor with enough men will think he can do anything. I give you my word that Huron will never attack Laconia, Lord Huron said. This was a slip of the tongue that betrayed the fact that he was already planning on naming his empire after himself. Al-Salah smiled, nodded, and then the men went their separate ways. As Hananel and Al-Salah walked away, the king said, I fear that you are right, my friend. Then let me stop him now, Al-Salah said. No, I will not have you shed blood for what may take place hundreds of season changes hence. I may be wrong, but I will err on the side of peace. As you command, my king, my heirs will be prepared, Al-Salah said. Do you think Al-Salah was right? Bonson asked. I don't know, but I don't think so, Hellel replied. Alva wouldn't think he was right, Bonson said. No, he wouldn't, but he's a Danais. A good kingdom needs Danais and men like Hananel. A man of peace to rule and a warrior to preserve peace. That, I believe, is what Lord Huron did not understand. So that's the whole story? Nearly. Lord Huron quickly took the title of emperor and began expanding his empire, freeing many from harsh and selfish masters and seeming to do great good. Some hundreds of season changes later, his heir sent a message to Hananel's heir, saying he must assimilate Laconia into being a Huron tributary for the stability of the region. Of course, he was refused. Hundreds of season changes after that, Daifon the Conqueror finally believed himself to be powerful enough to fulfill Al-Salah Danai IV's prophecy. You know the rest. That certainly makes the betrayal of Alva's father more acute, Bonson said. Hela's face soured for a moment, then he said, "That could be argued, but like his ancestor, Philon III did what he believed was right. These are difficult questions. A Danae is almost always right, but he will almost never think he is wrong. That is why the Danaes will not become kings. They know themselves. They will not accept disobedience from their subordinates, but they obey their masters even when they believe they are wrong." "I could live in a world where Alva was king," Bonson replied. "As could I," Hel-El mused. "But Alva couldn't. Alva wouldn't." Alright, friends, I'm stopping there today. I know yesterday I promised you a bit of fighting, but I don't want to add too much in one day, so I'm going to postpone my promise for one more day. Tomorrow, I promise fighting.